My father died on a rainy Tuesday morning. For 43 years, I had watched him come home to the same house, sit at the same kitchen table, and complain about the same things. He wasn't a perfect man, but I thought I knew him. His name was David. He was 68 when he died. After the funeral, my mother couldn't bring herself to touch anything in his study, so I started going through his things for her. 3 weeks later, I found a small cardboard box hidden behind some old folders. There were photographs inside. The first one showed my father standing beside a woman I'd never seen before. They were smiling at the camera. Behind them stood 2 children. I turned the photograph over. There was a date from 24 years earlier. Underneath it, my father's handwriting said, "My other family." I stared at those words until they stopped looking real. I picked up another photograph. My father was sitting at a kitchen table with the same woman and the 2 children. There was a birthday cake in front of them. Another showed him opening Christmas presents with the little boy. Another showed him teaching the girl to ride a bicycle. These weren't photographs of some distant relatives. My father had been there, again and again. I took the box downstairs. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. "Mom, do you know these people?" She looked at the photograph. Her face changed. "No. You've never seen this woman?" "No." "What about the children?" She shook her head. "I've never seen any of them." I placed another photograph in front of her. She picked it up with trembling hands. "Where did you get these?" "Dad's study." She stared at the photograph for several seconds. Then she whispered, "David never told me about them." I didn't know what to say. Neither did she. I put the photographs back into the box, but one detail kept bothering me. The address. Someone had written an address on the back of one of the photographs. I looked it up. It was a house in a town about 2 hours away. I told my mother I was going to find out who they were. She immediately said no. "Daniel, leave it alone." "Why?" "Your father is dead." "I know. Whatever this was, it's over." I looked at the photograph again. "Maybe it isn't." She shook her head. "I don't want to know." But I did. The next morning I drove to the address. The house was small, quiet, and well kept. I sat in my car for almost 5 minutes before finally getting out. I walked to the front door. Then I knocked. A woman answered. She was around my father's age. She looked at me for a few seconds. Then her expression changed. "You must be David's son." My stomach tightened. "Yes." She stared at me. "Michael?" I shook my head. "My name is Daniel." The woman's face went completely pale. "Daniel?" "Yes." She looked over her shoulder, then back at me. "He never told us about Daniel." I felt a cold sensation move through my chest. "Who are you?" She swallowed. "My name is Emily." She looked at the photograph in my hand. I was David's wife. I couldn't speak. "My father's wife?" "Yes." She stepped aside. "Come inside." I walked through the doorway. The first thing I saw was another photograph of my father, then another, and another. He was everywhere, on the walls, on the shelves, inside frames. He wasn't a visitor in this house. He belonged here. Emily closed the door behind me. Then she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I think you and I need to talk about your father." And for the first time in my life, I realized that the man I thought I knew had been living an entire second life. A life none of us knew existed. Emily led me into the living room. The walls were covered with photographs. My father was everywhere. In one, he was standing beside Emily at the beach. In another, he was holding a little girl on his shoulders. There were Christmas photographs, birthday photographs, family holidays, and pictures of ordinary evenings at home. I had never seen any of them. My father had spent 24 years building memories in this house, memories I had never known existed. Emily noticed me staring. "He loved taking pictures." I looked at her. "My father hated having his picture taken." She frowned. "He did?" "My mother always complained about it. She'd ask him to smile and he'd tell her he didn't like photographs." Emily gave a quiet, confused laugh. "That doesn't sound like the man I knew." I looked at another photograph. "How long were you together?" 24 years. "Married?" She nodded. 22. I felt my stomach tighten. My father was married to my mother for 43 years. Emily stared at me. "I know." "No, I mean they were married the entire time." She looked down. "I understand. Did he ever tell you he had been married before?" "No." Did he ever tell you he had another child?" Emily hesitated. "He told me he had one son." I already knew the answer. "Michael?" She nodded. "My oldest." "How old is he?" 40. I looked at her. "I'm 42. Emily's expression changed. For the first time, she seemed to understand what this meant. You're older than Michael. Yes. She sat down slowly. He told me Michael was his only child. My father told my mother I was his only child. Neither of us spoke. Then Emily whispered, "So he lied to both of us?" I nodded. I looked around the room again. Where are the children? Michael is at work. Rachel is at university. I looked at the photographs. You have a daughter too? Yes. I couldn't believe it. My father hadn't just had another child. He had an entire family, a son, a daughter, a wife, a home. And somehow he had managed to keep all of us separate. Emily stood and walked toward a cabinet. She opened a drawer and pulled out an old calendar. This might help. I looked at it. Every month was filled with handwritten notes. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. There were names and dates. Michael's birthday, Rachel's birthday, anniversaries, school events, work trips. I turned several pages. Then I stopped. There were certain dates marked simply home. Others said work. I looked closer. The work dates were always clustered around weekends, and some of them matched dates I remembered from my own childhood. I pointed at one. This one. Emily looked. What about it? My father told us he was away for work that weekend. She stared at the calendar. He was here. I looked at her. He was with you? Yes. I turned another page. There were more. The same pattern. Every few weeks, my father disappeared from one family and appeared in the other. Emily watched me slowly understand. He told me his job required travel, she said. He told my mother the same thing. She sat down. For several seconds, she simply stared at the calendar. Then she asked, "Did your mother know?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes." I paused. "At least, she says she doesn't." Emily looked at me. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't know what to believe anymore." She was quiet. Then she picked up another photograph. It showed my father standing beside a young boy. "Michael." She turned it over. "My boys." I stared at the words. "My boys." 2 words. My father had written them about Michael and someone else. I looked at Emily. "Did he ever talk about me?" She shook her head. "Never." I looked down. "Then why did he leave these photographs?" "I don't know." I turned the photograph over again. There was something written beneath the date. A short sentence. "One day they'll know each other." I looked at Emily. "Did David write this?" She nodded. "When?" "I don't know." I stared at the sentence. If my father had intended to keep us apart forever, why would he write that? Why would he imagine a day when his 2 families would finally meet? Emily took the photograph from me. "I've never seen that before." "Then why was it in his things?" She looked at me. "Maybe your father knew this day would come." I felt a chill. "What day?" "The day you found us." Before I could answer, we heard a car pull into the driveway. Emily looked toward the window. "That's Michael." I stood up. A moment later, the front door opened. A man walked inside. He looked at me. I looked at him. For a second, neither of us moved. Then his eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" Emily opened her mouth, but I answered first. "My name is Daniel." He stared at me. Something about his expression changed. Then he looked at Emily. "Mom?" She couldn't speak. I watched him look back at me, and I saw my father's face looking back at me from a stranger. My father had a second family, but they didn't know about us. Michael didn't move. He just stood in the doorway staring at me. Then he looked at Emily. "Mom?" She took a breath. "Michael, this is Daniel." He looked confused. "Daniel who?" I swallowed. "Daniel David." His expression changed immediately. My father's name was David. So was mine. Neither of us said anything. Michael walked closer. "You're his son?" "Yes." He looked at Emily. She nodded. "I didn't know about him." Michael looked back at me. "Dad never mentioned you." "He never mentioned you either." Michael gave a nervous laugh. "This is insane." "I know." He sat down slowly. I stayed standing. For several seconds he just looked at me. Then he asked, "How old are you?" 42. He stared at me. "I'm 40. I nodded. "Your father told my mother I was his only child." Michael looked at Emily. "He told us the same thing." I sat down opposite him. For the first time, I noticed how much we looked alike. The same eyes, the same shape of nose, even the same small scar above the eyebrow. Michael noticed it too. "I got that when I was 8. I touched my eyebrow." "So did I." He looked at Emily. She covered her mouth. "David used to tell me that scar came from falling off a bicycle." I stared at him. He told me exactly the same story. Michael laughed once. It wasn't a happy laugh? He really used the same stories? Apparently. We sat there in silence. Then Michael stood up. "Come with me." He walked toward the kitchen. I followed. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photograph. It showed my father teaching him to ride a bicycle. "I was 6, Michael said. I I looked at the photograph. My dad taught me the same way. Michael looked at me. Did he whistle? I froze. What? When he was nervous. Dad used to whistle without realizing it. I stared at him. My father did that too. Michael shook his head slowly. This is ridiculous. No, he looked at me. It's not ridiculous. He placed the photograph on the table. It's real. Emily came into the kitchen. She looked at both of us. What are you thinking? Michael answered. I want a DNA test. I nodded immediately. So do I. Emily looked frightened. Do we really need one? Michael looked at her. Mom, we already know. She shook her head. No, we think we know. I understood. Even after everything we'd found, she needed certainty. 3 days later, we got the results. Michael opened the email first. He read it silently. Then he looked at me. You're my brother. I nodded. Yeah. He smiled weakly. I never had a brother. Neither did I. He sat back. Then he asked the question I'd been avoiding. Why did he hide us? I didn't know, so I went home and searched through my father's things again. This time I found something I hadn't noticed before. An old calendar. The dates were divided into 2 columns. Family and work. I compared them with the calendar we'd found at Emily's house. They matched almost perfectly. For 24 years, my father had been moving between 2 lives. But one date caught my attention. A date from when I was 10. It was marked differently. Not family, not work. Just one word. Hospital. I remembered being 10. I remembered being sick. I remembered my mother crying. But I didn't remember my father leaving the hospital. I looked at the date again. Then I noticed something written underneath it. A name. Emily. My hands went cold. I called her. Emily, I need to ask you something. What? Did you ever meet my father at the hospital when I was a child? There was silence. Then she said, yes. I sat down. When? When you were 10. I closed my eyes. Why were you there? Her voice became quiet. Because David asked me to come. I couldn't speak. Then she said, Daniel, there's something else. What? He told me that day was the reason he could never leave either family. And suddenly I realized the second family wasn't the only secret my father had kept from me. There was something about that hospital, something that had happened when I was 10, and my father had spent the rest of his life making sure I never remembered it. My father had a second family, but they didn't know about us. Emily's words stayed in my head all night. He told me that day was the reason he could never leave either family. The next morning I drove back to her house. Michael was already there. I put the old calendar on the table. Why was my father at the hospital when I was 10? Emily looked at Michael, then at me. Because you were very sick. I know that part. What I don't know is why you were there. Emily took a breath. David called me. Why? He said he needed me to come. What did he say? He told me that you were his son, that he loved you, and that he couldn't keep lying forever. I stared at her. He was going to tell me. He was going to tell your mother first. Michael looked confused. Mom, you never told me this. I never told anyone. I looked at her. What happened? Emily's eyes filled with tears. I arrived at the hospital, but David wasn't alone. Who was with him? Your mother. I froze. My mother knew you were there? Yes. But she told me she never knew you. She didn't know me before that day. I couldn't understand. Then what happened? Emily looked down. Your father introduced us. For a moment nobody spoke. He told your mother everything, Emily continued. He told her about me, about Michael, about Rachel. He said he was going to stop lying and make a decision. I felt something tighten in my chest. What did Mom say? She asked him one question. What? Emily looked at me. She asked whether he was going to leave her while their son was lying in a hospital bed. I looked away. I suddenly remembered that week. I remembered waking up and seeing my mother beside me. I remembered my father sitting in the corner of the room. I remembered being too weak to understand why they were arguing. But there was one thing I didn't remember. Another woman. Emily continued. Your mother told David that if he left, she would never let him see you again. I looked at her. She threatened him. She was terrified. That doesn't answer my question. No. Emily sighed. She was angry, frightened, and desperate. Your father was too. Michael looked at me. So what did Dad do? Emily answered quietly. He chose neither of us. I felt a strange sadness. He stayed with your mother, she continued, but he promised me he would never abandon my children. And he didn't. No. I thought about the photographs, the birthdays, the Christmas mornings, the school events. He had kept that promise, but he had kept it through a lie. I looked at Emily. Why didn't you tell my mother about the children? I wanted to. Then why didn't you? Because David asked me not to. I shook my head. Everyone kept protecting him. Emily nodded. Yes. I went quiet. Then I remembered something. My mother said she knew about you for 10 years. Emily looked confused. 10 years? Yes. She contacted me about 10 years ago. I stared at her. What? Emily looked at Michael. She came to my house. My heart stopped. You met her? Yes. But you said you didn't know about her. I didn't. Not until she stood at my door. I sat down. What did she say? Emily took a breath. She told me David was dead. I looked at her, but he wasn't. No. So why would she say that? I don't know. When was this? She told me the date. I immediately recognized it. It was the same week my father had claimed he was away for work. I felt sick. My mother hadn't simply discovered Emily. She had gone to her, and she had lied to her. I called my mother. She answered after the third ring. Daniel, why did you tell Emily that Dad was dead 10 years ago? Silence. Then she whispered, because I thought he was going to leave me. You lied to her. Yes. Why? Because I was afraid. I closed my eyes. You knew about her children. I knew about Michael. I didn't know about Rachel then. You knew she had a family. Yes. And you still let Dad continue seeing them. She started crying. I thought if I exposed everything, I'd lose you too. You already had me. I know. There was a long silence. Then she said, Daniel, there is something your father never told you about that hospital. I felt my stomach tighten. What? He didn't go there only because you were sick. Then why? My mother hesitated. He had something with him. What? A letter. What letter? The one he planned to give you when you were old enough to understand. I looked at Emily. What happened to it? My mother's voice became barely audible. I destroyed it. I froze. Why? Because I read it. What did it say? She didn't answer. Mom. Finally she whispered. It said that your father had already decided which family he was going to leave. I felt the room go silent. Which one? My mother started crying. Us. My father had a second family, but they didn't know about us. My mother's words stayed in my head. It said that your father had already decided which family he was going to leave. I couldn't speak. Which one? I asked again. My mother cried quietly on the other end of the phone. Us! I sat down. So Dad was going to leave you? Yes. And me? You were 10. That doesn't answer the question. She took a breath. He said he couldn't keep living two lives. He wanted to be with Emily. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd believed my father had simply been away for work. Now I was learning that, at one point, he had actually planned to leave us. Why did you destroy the letter? Because I was terrified. You had no right. I know. What did the letter say? I don't remember every word. You read it. I was angry. I was crying. I didn't think. Mom. She was silent. Then she said, there was one sentence I remember. What? He wrote that he loved you, but he couldn't keep pretending he could be a father to two families without destroying both. I stared at the floor. For the first time, my father's behavior made sense. He hadn't simply decided to have two families. At some point, he had tried to choose, and something had stopped him. I hung up and drove back to Emily's house. Michael was sitting in the living room. Emily looked at me. What did she say? I sat down. She destroyed a letter my father wrote when I was 10. Emily's face changed. The letter? You knew about it. She nodded. He told me he was going to leave. I stared at her. For us? Yes. Michael looked at his mother. You never told me Dad was going to leave them. I didn't want you to carry that. I looked at Emily. What happened? She took a breath. Your father came to me after the hospital. He said he had made his decision. What decision? He wanted to live with us. I felt a strange ache in my chest. Then why didn't he? Emily looked at me. Because your mother found me. I froze. What did she do? She came to my house. 10 years ago? No. Emily shook her head. That was later. When? The night before David was supposed to leave. I stared at her. My mother came here? Yes. What did she say? She told me that David had changed his mind. Did you believe her? I didn't know what to believe. Emily's voice broke. She told me that David had chosen you. I looked at Michael. He was staring at the floor. And then? Emily wiped her eyes. I asked David. What did he say? He said he loved me. I waited. And he said he couldn't leave his son. I felt tears forming in my eyes. He chose me. Emily nodded. He chose you. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Michael said quietly, so Dad stayed with both families because of Daniel. Emily looked at him. No. She shook her head. He stayed because he was afraid to lose either. I understood then. My father had made a decision, but it wasn't really a choice. He had chosen to avoid choosing, and that decision had lasted for another 32 years. I looked at Emily. Why did you stay with him after that? She gave a tired smile. Because I loved him. Then she looked at me. And because he promised me that one day he would tell you everything. I thought about the letter, the photographs, the calendar, the second phone. Everything had been waiting for me. Maybe my father had known that one day the truth would escape him. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the photograph from his box, the one with the words, "One day they'll know each other." I turned it over. There was something I hadn't noticed before. A second line had been written underneath. "I just hope I'm alive when they do." I stared at it. My father had known. He had known this day would come, and suddenly I realized there was only one thing left to find. The original letter. The one my mother claimed she had destroyed. Because if she had really destroyed it, there was nothing left to explain. But if she hadn't, then my father had left me one final truth. My father had a second family, but they didn't know about us. The next morning, I went back to my father's study. I searched through every drawer, every folder, and every box I hadn't opened yet. For almost 2 hours, I found nothing. Then I noticed something strange about the bottom drawer of his desk. It was locked. I tried several keys from his old keyring. The third one worked. Inside was a thin envelope. My name was written on it. Daniel. I opened it with shaking hands. There was a letter. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. He had written it years before his death. "Daniel, if you're reading this, then you finally know about Emily and the children. I wish I had told you myself, but I spent too many years believing I could find a way to protect everyone from the truth." I kept reading. He explained everything. He had loved my mother. He had loved Emily, and instead of choosing one of them, he convinced himself that he could somehow keep both families without destroying either. When I was 10, he had finally decided to leave, not because he loved us less, because he knew his double life was hurting everyone. He went to the hospital intending to tell my mother, but after seeing me lying in that bed, he couldn't do it. He couldn't walk away from his son, so he stayed. Then he went back to Emily and promised that he would still be there for her and the children. And for the next 32 years, he kept making the same promise to everyone, until there was no way left to keep any of them. Then I reached the final paragraph. "I want you to understand something, Daniel. You were never the reason I stayed with your mother, and you were never the reason I stayed with Emily. I stayed because I was too afraid to make a choice. I told myself that was love. It wasn't. It was cowardice." I stopped reading. For the first time, I felt like my father was speaking honestly. There was one final sentence. "I hope that when you meet your brothers and sister, you don't see them as proof that I betrayed your family. See them as people who were lied to just as you were." I folded the letter. Then I called Michael. He came over that evening with Emily and Rachel. My mother came too. For a few minutes, nobody knew what to say. Finally, Emily looked at my mother. "I spent 24 years thinking I was the only woman he loved." My mother looked down. "So did I." Emily swallowed. "I hated you when I found out about you." My mother nodded. "I hated you too." There was a long silence. Then my mother said, "But neither of us knew what he had done." Emily looked at her. "No, we weren't enemies." Emily shook her head. "No, we were both his wives." That sentence stayed in the room. Michael looked at me. "So we're really brothers?" I smiled. "Looks like it." He laughed quietly. "I never thought I'd have an older brother." "Neither did I." Rachel smiled. "Well, I guess Dad left us one thing none of us expected." I looked at her. "What?" She looked around the table. "Each other." I thought about my father. For 24 years, he had built walls between two families because he was terrified of what would happen if those walls came down. He thought the truth would destroy us, but sitting around that table, I realized he had been wrong. The truth didn't destroy us. It destroyed the version of our lives that had been built on his lies. And maybe that was necessary. I still miss my father. I probably always will. But I no longer see him as the man I thought he was. I see him as a flawed man who loved his family and still managed to hurt every person he loved because he was too afraid to tell the truth. He spent 24 years making sure his two families never met. In the end, his biggest secret didn't destroy either family. It only destroyed the lie that had kept us apart.